You were talking about diverging vision for cooperation. I'm afraid that it's not a problem just for Caspian region, and so EU it's a good test case for this in a way. Actually, what I'd like to discuss with you is exactly the growing cooperation and engagement coming from the EU toward the region. And in particular, its main driver, we have been talking extensively about it today, which is, of course, energy and energy security. And this moving from the assumption that EU energy policies toward the Caspian, and particularly, I would say, toward Azerbaijan, provides a privileged perspective and even a very good test case to evaluate its main accomplishment and shortcomings, as well as, I would say, the coherence between its aims and its means. Indeed, since the beginning of the centuries, two trends emerged quite clearly and in a way overlapped and influenced one each other, which were, on the one hand, a new understanding about energy security coming out into the EU framework, and on the other hand, the inauguration of, we can call it the second phase of energy resources development in the Caspian after, let's say, the opening up in the course of the 90s. I was referring to this new understanding of energy security within the EU framework. Without going into details, what is relevant here to note is that in order to ensure an adequate supply of resources at a reasonable price, the key element of energy security, for the first time, the beginning of the 2000s, EU began focusing its action and its policies and even the debate, I would say, on the supply side of the energy equation rather than on the demand side. This was, in a way, a real watershed for the EU perception and EU action even toward the area. Since while acting, as always has been the case for the EU, on the demand entails a kind of technical protection measures that has to deal primarily with the domestic market, while acting on the supply side entails an external dimension of the policies, and so forces, in a way, EU to deal with third countries to ensure, of course, the access and transport of energy resources. Corollary of this approach is therefore this special emphasis on the political side of the energy security, which was quite evident since the beginning of the 2000s. And it is exactly this geopolitical dimension which, in a way, modified the way in which EU perceived the Caspian area and energy cooperation in the Caspian area in comparison, especially to the 90s, when EU was present. Of course, European energy companies were present, but EU was here basically in a non-political profile, very technical. This morning we mentioned Inogate, Tacis, and so on and so forth. So it was this geopolitical understanding which made EU aspiring to be a geopolitical actor in the area. The main motivation for action were basically economical on the one hand, so growing demand for energy and particularly gas, of course, declining domestic production, and over-dependency. We have been quoting this many times today, on a limited number of suppliers, and this again especially on the gas sector, where the three main suppliers, namely Russia, Norway and Algeria, has shared something like 75% of EU yearly imports. So dependency on energy suppliers, external energy suppliers, does not pose in itself a threat. This, as far as the consumer side may benefit from an energy network stable and enough diversified, which unfortunately is not the case for European Union, and particularly is not the case for Central and Eastern Europe, which for both historical and geographical reason even heavily rely on Russian supply, on supply from the Russian energy champion Gazprom, of course, which they perceive as an unreliable partner, if not a threat. due to its, of course, closeness with the Kremlin and due to its role in the Russian foreign policy making. Such a perception, of course, was reinforced by Russian aggressive energy policies. We all know about the periodical crisis with transit states. But it's important because it takes us to the political side of EU energy security policies motivation, linked to, on the one hand, the need to defend EU member states from this kind of threat perception. It's not important if this threat is real or perceived. The threat perception is there and is coming from one single actor. And so to safeguard intra-EU solidarity, which is the very base of the European construction. So it's exactly on this backdrop that the EU, since 2003, put forward the concept of priority access for infrastructure, in particular the one in between EU, Middle East and Caspian area. The one which from 2008 came to be known as Southern Corridor, in order to open, we have been mentioning this, a fourth supply channel for the European Union. And this is on the same backdrop that, in a way, Azerbaijan became a key Caspian interlocutor for the EU, due to its double value of producing states and potentially of transit state for the, of course, resources coming from the eastern side of the basin. Let's say that putting forward the idea of the Southern Corridor, in a way, EU took over a US project, the US project of an east-west corridor, which was dated back to end of the 90s. Probably not having the same political capabilities in the area, but I will come back soon to that. Let's say that two were the main drivers for EU action. The one was, again, the support for priority infrastructure through the Trans-European Energy Network, and the other one was the promotion of energy partners with producing and transit states, both bilaterally and multilaterally. Such an engagement, based on the assumption of interdependence between consumer side and producing side, involved, on the one hand, deepening the dialogue with their partner, and on the other hand, the promotion of a common regulatory space aimed, on the one hand, at facilitating the flow of investment toward the area, and on the other hand, to extend EU norms and institutions beyond its border, with a view to promote kind of pan-European energy space. This is quite important from my understanding, because under this perspective, energy security policies came to be regarded not just, how to say, an aim in itself, in order to diversify its energy supply system, but also as a tool for engaging partners with a view to create an arch of stability beyond its border, what Romano Prodi, then Commissioner for Europe, called the ring of France just beyond European border. So, although we, of course, do not have the time to enter into the detail of EU action, what is relevant to note is that the degree of political investment coming, especially from European Commission, was very high and improved with the growth of the obstacle to the realization of the critical infrastructure. It would be enough here to mention four main major actions. The one was the appointment, of a special coordination for critical infrastructure. The second one was the allocation of funds within the 2008 European Economic Recovery Program as a kind of stimulus packages. The third one was the attempt, quite important, to set up in 2008 an aggregator for gas demand coming from European Union, the so-called Caspian Development Commission, aimed on the one hand at foster the added value of a joint consumer action, and on the other hand, critically important, to overcome the defense attitude of a gas producer. Of course, in this case, I'm referring basically to the resource nationalism in Turkmenistan. Last but, of course, not least, was the EU decision without any precedent to endorse the European Commission in September 2011 with the mandate to negotiate on behalf of member states a legally binding treaty with Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan for the construction of the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline. This to say that the promotion of the Southern Gas Corridor has emerged as one of the key initiatives of the European Union in the energy sector, and I would say also one of the major political investments by the European Commission. On the eve of Shah Deniz gas allocation, it can be said that EU, in conclusion, played at least a relevant facilitating role in ensuring the flow of Azerbaijani gas toward European markets. This because, in a way, it contributed to the advancement of the project by providing them with political backing and public visibility on the one hand, and at the same time acting as a catalyst for investment and funding from international financial institutions. Yet, the European institution role did not turn out to be decisive in fostering the realization of those projects. This was primarily due to technical reasons, linked especially to the shortcomings of the Trans-European Energy Network, which in a way lacks focus, flexibility, and has a too rigid top-down, bottom-up approach, which can not easily be turned upside down. But, of course, the shortcomings were not only technical in nature. Indeed, in a way, EU institutions lack means to ensure consistency between European and national infrastructure priorities. That is, a way to coordinate the prioritization of infrastructure at EU and member state level. Hence, the key role was definitely played by energy companies with the direct or indirect support of their national institutions. So while, in a way, the primary role of the national companies, we were talking today about this, is inscribed in the market rules, on the other hand, member state energy policies have more often than not turned to be contradictory and in a way even contrary to that spirit of intra-EU solidarity I was mentioning before. And this in turn, on the one hand, did not of course contribute to the transparency of the energy competition, and on the other hand, what is probably worse from the European Commission point of view, untied the interdependence knot that for the Commission was the base for international projection of the European Union, for the famous single voice on energy issues. So in this context, the forthcoming opening of the first leg, I hope, of the Southern Gas Corridor is primarily the result of the convergence of interest and policies in between energy companies, member state, transit and producing country, of course, referring to Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey in this case, and EU institution. But what I'd like to underline here is that where this convergence did not figure out, and it was the case for the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline, for instance, EU having to play kind of leading role for the process failed. This, I would say, that coming to quickly to a conclusion, even if the economical and political causes that make today the possibility of having a Trans-Caspian link were not entirely dependent, of course, on EU failures, EU still lacked the strength to overcome them, lacking basically an effective policies of both economic and political incentive toward its external partner. And so, under this perspective, European energy policy shortcomings are basically the result of the lack of a wider and consistent regional strategy, which critically should be able to tackle all those issues will impinge upon the energy and foreign policy of EU partner countries. Unless EU provides political depth, in conclusion, to its regional energy policies, its cooperation aim will be dependent upon the goodwill and the interest of its partner.